Joining me now is Bill Federer. Earlier today, and you should go back and watch it, I did a full interview with Trevor Loudon on these individuals, the two guys, I think 17 and 18, that sadly murdered 3 people at a mosque in San Diego. Now, this is kind of a mosque that's tied controversy of its own, that's for sure. But we did a piece yesterday on radio and TV at 1 Central with Annie Cyrus. And I was trying to figure out what's going on here. The narrative didn't make sense. Guys that have gas cans that had the lightning bolt of the SS on it, remember that? Why would guys supposedly aligned with the SS worldview be attacking a mosque? Because weren't those two groups working together during the Holocaust? The Grand Mufti of Palestine, al-Husseini of the Muslim Brotherhood, and Hitler? Yes. The answer is yes. Well, the more we delve into it, we found out that these guys are really what you would call national Bolsheviks. Trevor described it today as really a mixture between a coming together of communism and Nazism, socialism and Nazism, communism and Nazism, more accurately. And apparently the goal is to start a civil war in America. They want to start what they call a holy race war. A holy race war in America. That's very interesting because I have a book written many, many years ago. It had a few updates along the way. It was written by a friend of mine, the late John Stormer, who I've interviewed. By the way, you could go into my vault and you could find interviews where I interviewed John Stormer, who wrote this book, None Dare Call It Treason, which Bill Federer probably knew him. I'll ask Bill because John was based in St. Louis and Bill lived in St. Louis for many, many, many years. And Stormer wrote this book, and Ronald Reagan, he told me on the interviews, used to order it by the case when he met Reagan while they were both working on the election of trying to get elected Barry Goldwater. I think that was 1964. And Reagan used to order it up by the case, he said. Send him a check and he'd send him a case and he'd pass them out. Well, the book got updated along the way. It sold 7 million copies. Look at what he writes where you go to Bill Federer on this. Because, folks, they are still trying to create a race war in America. Because you see, as Trevor was explaining today, by attacking this mosque, one Andy Nye on Twitter called it a friendly fire, ? Why would they do this? And that's what we were trying to ask and answer yesterday. Now we have our answer, I think. Their goal, I think, is to use things like this to cause the left to crack down on the Second Amendment and thereby incite the right. So anything they can do to create racial strife, racial, religious, economic strife, it doesn't matter. The change comes from the conflict. They want a civil war. Now, Trevor went through great detail to show how this has got the worldview of Alexander Dugin, who's known as Putin's brain, who's openly written. In fact, I have a quote by him, and I'll bring it up here in a minute. He's openly written about creating racial problems in America, internal conflict in America. But in this book, None Dare Call It Treason, so many years ago, John Stormer was warning about this. He writes, what happened at Kent State University, remember that? Was not the first demonstration of the communist ability or willingness to stir people to violence. Riots stemming from conflicts between races killed nearly 150 persons and injured thousands of others between 1964 and 1967. Looting, sniper attacks on police, and massive civil disobedience destroyed the centers of almost 100 American cities. Over $1 billion worth of property was destroyed. Think about what that number would be today in today's dollars. As Americans started to ask, why? Evidence mounted that the upheaval was not purely the result of spontaneous combustion. They were part of the communist program for destroying America's ability to resist. In February 1967, FBI Chief J. Edgar Hoover told a committee of the U.S. Congress, quote, "Communists and other subversives and extremists strive and labor ceaselessly to precipitate racial trouble and take advantage of racial discord in this country. Such elements were active in exploiting and aggravating the riots, for example, in Harlem, Watts, Cleveland, and Chicago," end quote. Other law enforcement agencies and judicial commissions have issued similar warnings. On the fourth day of the Harlem riots in 1964, acting New York City Mayor Paul Scrivan stated that, quote, "known communists," end quote, had been involved in the inflammatory rallies and meetings which preceded the riots, and that communist money had probably financed some of the demonstrations. Former communist Philip Abbott Luce later confirmed his charges. In his book, Road to Revolution, written after he left the conspiracy, the communist conspiracy, Luce told how he and other communists were, quote, "in the center of these riots and did everything possible to expand and extend the riot condition," end quote. He said, quote, "all of us good communists were responsible for some work in the riots, and each of us longed for the possibility that Harlem would herald the beginning of a nationwide guerrilla warfare," end quote. The Cuyahoga County Special Grand Jury, which investigated the 1966 summer riots in Cleveland, Ohio, reported, quote, "the jury finds the outbreak of lawlessness and disorder was both organized, precipitated, and exploited by a relatively small group of trained and disciplined professionals at this business. They were aided and abetted willingly or otherwise by misguided people of all ages and colors, many of whom were avowed believers in violence and extremism, and some of whom are either members or officers of the Communist Party," end quote. Police officials from Cincinnati, Ohio, Nashville, Tennessee, and other cities told the Senate Judiciary Committee that racial harmony existed in their cities until outside agitators moved in. And of course, many of you know about Carmichael, Stokely Carmichael. He's one of the guys behind the Black Panthers. The Nashville Police Captain John Soros testified that an April 8, 1967 riot in his city followed a week of agitation by Stokely Carmichael. An outbreak of violence in Dayton, Ohio followed a speech by H. Rap Brown, who succeeded Carmichael as head of the SNCC. That's the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Brown spoke in East St. Louis, Illinois on September 10, 1967. 4 days later, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch summed up what happened. Quote, "In the 4 days since Brown's appearance at Lincoln Senior High School, there have been almost 80 fires, most of them minor, 13 injuries, 1 death, and 49 arrests. Arson is suspected in many of the fires. No damage estimates have been made," end quote. Brown was also blamed for a riot in Cambridge, Maryland on July 24th. Cambridge Police Chief Bryce Kenningham told Congress that a, quote, "highly inflammatory speech," end quote, by Brown was, quote, "the sole reason for our riot," end quote. The street was full of guns seconds after the speech. It was well organized and a well-planned affair. That's what he said. The speech received national press coverage at the time. Brown told the Cambridge, Maryland crowd, quote, "get a gun. I don't care if it's a BB gun with poison BBs. America's got to come around or black people are going to burn it down," end quote. As these police officers testified of the role agitators such as Carmichael and Brown played in sparking riots, Carmichael himself visited Castro's Cuba and said that America's Negroes would wage a guerrilla, quote, "fight to the death," end quote, in Havana for a meeting of Latin American communist revolutionary leaders. That's what he said before them. Carmichael said, quote, in Newark, we applied the war tactics of the guerrillas. We are preparing groups of urban guerrillas for our defense in the cities. The price of these rebellions is a high price one must pay. This fight is not going to be a simple street meeting. It's going to be a fight to the death, end quote. And I could go on on how this has been a tactic going back so many years for racial strife. What's interesting is you have Black Americans agitating for it. You have white Americans agitating for it. You have Islamists agitating for it. Joining me now to discuss this is historian Bill Federer. Bill, welcome to the broadcast. Thanks for being with us.
Hey, Brandon, great to be with you.
Thank you. I know you were friends with John Stormer too, right? I mean, he was right in your backyard in St. Louis, right?
Right. I spoke together for him many times, and he did have his book published of 7 million copies, and he personally gave it to Ronald Reagan. And but the point you're bringing out is pretty clear. Matter of fact, there's a gentleman named Manning Johnson, who was a Black man who became a communist, who later left and was exposing their tactics. And he wrote a book, and he said that the plot to use the Negroes as the spearhead or expendables was concocted by Stalin in 1928, nearly 10 years after the formation of the World Organization of Communism. So here, Stalin himself was an expert at looking at the different groups in a country and figuring out how can he pit them against each other. In 1964, the KGB leader, Yuri Andropov, invented the PLO, recruited Yasser Arafat, invented the concept of Palestinian. Prior to Yuri Andropov, there was no concept of Palestinian. They were the ones who Palestine was the homeland of the Jews. And so, but he wanted to stir up division in the Middle East so that the Middle East would not side with America. But this tactic, if I can just give a couple points, I only have a few minutes, but the Swedes in the 1700s, 1788, around then, had a leader named Gustav III, and his big enemy was Russia. And he wanted to have funding for his military for a war with Russia, but Parliament would not approve the funding. So this leader, Gustav of Sweden, had the tailor of the Royal Swedish Opera sew Russian uniforms and had Swedish soldiers put on the Russian uniforms and had them stage an attack at a Swedish outpost at Pumala. And when word spread across the country like wildfire that the Russians had attacked at Pumala, the Swedish parliament quickly approved the funding that Gustav wanted. And so this concept was improved upon by Hitler, who wanted to invade Poland in 1939. But world public opinion would have viewed the Nazis as the aggressors. And so in the Gleiwitz incident, you had Nazi soldiers put on Russian uniforms, Polish uniforms, and attack a German outpost at Gleiwitz. And they had a radio tower there, and they were giving play-by-play reports. The Polish are shooting, the Polish are attacking here, the Polish are this, that, and it spread around Germany and the world that the Polish had attacked Germany. And so Germany said, well, hey, we're justified in invading Poland because they attacked us first, not realizing the world didn't realize that it was the Germans dressed as Polish to incite it. This happened again with Finland. The Soviets wanted to invade Finland, but world public opinion would have viewed the Soviets as the aggressors. So in 1939, the Soviets shelled one of their own Russian villages on the Finnish border and blamed the Finnish for attacking. And this gave the Soviets an excuse to invade Finland in what's called the Winter War. And then you have 1931. and Japan is expansionistic and wanting to invade China. And again, world public opinion would have viewed Japan as the aggressor. Well, the Chinese were nice enough to let the Japanese have a railroad along the coast. And the Japanese claimed that there was a railroad explosion. And they blamed it on the Chinese, and they used that as an excuse to invade China. And they killed over 100,000 Chinese in Nanking, China. And later, there was an international investigation, and they walked the entire railroad line, and there was no explosion. The whole thing was fabricated because the Japanese wanted an excuse to invade. This happened again in Turkey in 1955. You had previous leaders in Turkey, like Ataturk, wanted to be secular leaders and get rid of the fezzes and the burqas and the calls to prayer. And Turkey was becoming more secular. Well, in 1955, they had a leader named Menderes, and he wanted to be the next caliph. And he was really bothered by these remaining Greek Christian neighborhoods in the capital city of Istanbul. And so he had a plot. And the plot was that a Turkish university student would go over to Greece and blow up the home of Ataturk, and then blow up the Turkish embassy in Greece and make it look like it was the Greek Orthodox that were doing this attack. Well, the bombs never went off, but the Turkish newspapers ran with the story anyway. And they had the front page that the Greeks had blown up Ataturk's home, and the Greeks, and it whips up the city of Istanbul into a frenzy, and they attack that remnant Greek neighborhood and destroy businesses and churches and dig up graves and all kinds of terrible stuff. And the remnant Greeks had to flee. And so this concept is a pretty typical political thing. Now, I don't know the exact details of what happened with the attack on the mosque in California, but we do know that there are those that want to cause an internal division in America. The word diabolical means to divide, right? To tear apart. And so how do you destroy a marriage? Sow division. How do you destroy a family? Sow division. How do you destroy a church? Sow division. How do you destroy a country? Sow division. It's introducing an autoimmune disease into the body politic. What's an autoimmune disease? It's where your own immune system starts attacking your own joints and organs. You have inflammation. You have a fire, a war going on inside of your own body. And so that's the tactic. One other story, in 1934, Stalin is in Russia, and he is facing a growing anti-Stalinist movement. And he says, how can I get rid of these anti-Stalinists? Well, at the same time, Stalin had a supporter. His name was Sergei Kirov. And he was an eloquent speaker. The people loved him. And Stalin was feeling a little uneasy that the people might actually like Sergei Kirov more than Stalin. So Stalin had an idea. He would assassinate his friend and supporter, Sergei Kirov, eliminating a potential rival, and blame the assassination on the anti-Stalinists, because the anti-Stalinists didn't like Stalin and did not like Stalin's supporter, Sergei Kirov. So Stalin used this as an excuse to do a crackdown on the anti-Stalinists, having hearings, arrests, detaining, and he killed over 1 million anti-Stalinists in between 1936 and 1938. And so, again, these tactics of wanting to sow division, but blame it on your opponents. One other, if I have a moment here, is Hitler. 1933 had brown shirts, and these were people that would create crises and blame it on their opponents. And so the brown shirts, would smash windows and block arms and block streets. Well, there's a fire that burns the Capitol building in Berlin, the Reichstag. And evidence points to Hitler's own supporters, the brown shirts, setting the fire. But in this confusion with the Capitol going up in flames, Hitler blames his political opponents. And in the confusion and panic, he rounds up all his political opponents and has them shot without a trial. And the dust settles. Hitler does not have any political opponents left, and he makes himself the Führer, the leader. But I bring these stories up to bring out how this is a classic concept that you want to, even you go back to Gideon in the Bible, and he defeats 100,000 Midianites, and nobody's thinking about invading Israel. But Gideon has lots of sons, and he fools around with a woman from Shechem and has an illegitimate son named Abimelech. And so Abimelech grows up, and he's jealous that his half brothers are the leaders after Gideon, and he wants power. And so Abimelech goes to the town of Shechem, and he says, "Is it better for you that the sons of Gideon reign over you? Remember also that I am your flesh and your bone." And the people say, "Well, we got to support Abimelech because he is our brother." It's the first case of identity politics in the Bible. And so they go to the temple of Baal-berith, and they take 70 pieces of silver, wherewith Abimelech hired vain and worthless persons, rioters, Antifa people, right, demonstrators, to do what? To commit violence. And they go to his brother's house at Ophrah, and they kill all the sons of Gideon, and Abimelech makes himself king. And so that would have been the end of the Hebrew Republic, but some lady a couple of years later threw a millstone over the wall, and it killed Abimelech. And they had a century and a half before they got Saul to end the Hebrew Republic. But again, here's a story of somebody intentionally hiring rioters to sow this division. And it's sort of like the Southern Poverty Law Center giving money to the KKK. It's like, I thought the KKK were your enemy. What are you doing giving them money? They need an enemy. It's like Castro said, the revolution needs the anti-revolutionary. It's antithesis. And if enemies were lacking, they had to be fabricated. You can't organize people against an enemy that doesn't exist. You have to fabricate an enemy so that you can sow this division and get the war going. The goal is a radical left and a radical right, and then cause fighting between them. In China, they called it color revolutions between the blacks and the reds. That was the name of the party. The blacks were the business owners and educated people and doctors and lawyers, and they had more money, and the reds were the working class, and they would pit them against each other. They called them, again, color revolutions. In the Congo, you had the Belgian colonizers coming in, and the people in the Congo saw themselves as one. But the colonizers would measure them and their features and their heights, and they would say, "You're a Hutu and you're a Tutsi," and made them go down to the government offices and register as a Hutu or a Tutsi. And then they stirred up division between them, and they genocided each other and weakened each other, and then the colonizing power was able to take over the whole country. And so this idea is if America is your enemy and you can't defeat America on the battlefield, what do? You got to sow division within. Well, how do you do division? You got to identify groups and ones with tension, and then you want to stir up and fan the tensions to get them to fight each other on purpose. And if there can be chaos, and then you can co-opt the media to blame the leader and overthrow the country and do a coup. So again, I'm not commenting on the specifics of the situation with the mosque attack, but I can share this historical track record of other global powers wanting to have internal division and fighting inside of America.
Yeah. Pull that in a little bit there, Logan, if you would, frame that up, because I want to give this quote. I gave it today on radio. I've given it before, but it bears repeating because as you guys know by now, because we've talked about it enough, Alexander Dugin is known as Putin's brain. He's written a lot of books. And he wrote this in Foundations of Geopolitics. It is especially important to introduce geopolitical disorder into internal American activity, encouraging all kinds of separatism and ethnic, social, and racial conflicts, actively supporting and all dissident movements, extremist, racist, sectarian groups, thus destabilizing internal political processes in the U.S. It would also make sense simultaneously to support isolationist tendencies in American politics, end quote. Well, isn't that what we see going on? This geopolitical disorder, the internal conflict, extremist, racist groups, getting everybody pitting against everyone so nobody can get along, no great big coalition, and the country goes to war with each other. And that's, again, what we talked about today extensively with Trevor Loudon at the 1 o'clock Central Time slot. So I'm concerned, I know you are concerned for where the country's going. Tonight on the Worldview Report, I actually talked about I'll get another computer here. I got so many computers with so much information on it, but I'll pull up another computer here where today I talked about a lady running for office in Texas. Okay. Believe it or not. Meet the Texas Democrat who wants a prison camp for American Zionists. Democrat congressional candidate San Antonio wants to turn an ICE detention center into a prison for American Zionists, and she has a runoff in 1 week. She wants them to be imprisoned. Accused Jewish Zionist of controlling politicians and the media, declared her runoff opponent should be tried for treason. Bill Malugin, who's with Fox News, said this. I'll pull up the full quote. She wants to turn the ICE detention center, quote, into a prison for American Zionists, end quote, and will use it as a castration processing center for pedophiles, quote, which will probably be most of the Zionists, end quote. Yes, it's real. And yes, the post is still up. She went on to claim things, I guess, about her opponent, part of a human trafficking conspiracy orchestrated by billionaire Zionist Jews. I bring all that up just to simply say, you know, we're in a time when we have the Islamists, the Marxists, whatever group you want to talk about. They're constantly coming at Christians, coming at the Jews. These are people that are winning elections. I'd be shocked if she won hers. But the mayor of New York City, he is about as radical as you can get. Newsom's about as radical as you can get. Governor of California. Kamala Harris, that was who the Democrats wanted to run for president. Thankfully, she lost. She's about as radical as you can get. She's got a plan out to overthrow the country, I guess, by basically getting rid of the rule of law and just taking over by brute force. Virginia, they got radicals just trying to basically destroy the Electoral College. I see the handwriting on the wall that if these people get back into power, Bill, you and I might very well be fighting for our freedom to stay out of prison, to stay out of being indicted and spending our last dollar fighting them for trumped up charges of hate speech or whatever else. Tell me in conclusion what your concern is if these nut jobs saying these things take over and start winning elections, either by hook or crook.
Yeah, if we don't have honest elections, have the SAFE Act, if we lose the midterms, then they're going to immediately impeach Trump, all his cabinet, and then they're going to come after us. You know, the pro-life Catholics, they'll come after the moms that speak out at school board meetings because they don't want their child transitioned. But then on a global scale, there won't be any pushback against the globalists, and I could see us quickly falling into this one world government type of scenario. So Trump is not a globalist. He wants to make America great, but if he wasn't there, you would have. I tell people, I ran for office 3 times. I had to raise millions of dollars. When you run for president, you need billions of dollars, and there's a small pool of people that have that amount of money, which means that those running need to go to those with the money and more or less do a trade. You give me your money, and I'll push your points. And so Trump is unique. I mean, who else can come up with $450 million for a bogus fine because he listed property higher than this person and this judge thought it should be listed? Anybody that sells a house lists it as high as they can, and it's up to the purchaser and the bank to decide what they want to lend. Trump didn't do anything wrong, but yet they fined him. Who else could come up with that money? He's totally unique. And again, I think he's the last chance to push back against globalism. And anyway, so just all that to say, this is a time for each one of us. Every election is critical, and this one's critical. And I think the Lord sort of has it that way on purpose to get us to come out of our complacency. And I tell people, by not getting involved, your silence is giving consent to the evil.
That's true.
It's like at a wedding ceremony, if you're silent, you're giving your consent. So you're not being spiritual by sitting out. You're actually giving your thumbs up to every evil thing that's out there. And so we need to take responsibility. But I appreciate you having me on, Brandon. You're a great leader, a great voice for truth. I run into people all across the country that watch you and have seen me on your programs. And so you're an encouragement to me and to millions of people.
Well, you're very kind. We've been working together now, probably, Bill, 30 years. So AmericanMinute.com, AmericanMinute.com. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Bill Federer checking in tonight. What an important topic. Let me give you another quote or two before we go to a quick break. Come back with, who's our next guest, Logan? Garland Favorito. Let's see here. You have so many quotes from John Stormer in his book. Let's see here. Look at this. There was a series of articles. This was by a columnist in St. Louis. Louis Lomax. Then one of America's leading Black authors. He was involved in a study of the 1967 Detroit riots. This is what he said. Quote, an organized group, this was a Black columnist, quote, an organized group largely from outside the Detroit area had been operating in the city more than a month. This group had an assignment, burn and destroy, end quote. Lomax said the group was highly organized, all well-trained, quote, not thieves and arsonists in the ordinary sense of the words, end quote. They are instead, he said, quote, revolutionaries committed to the conclusion that the power structure does not have the moral fiber to repent for its socioeconomic sins, that the only true corrective measure is to leave the nation in ashes, end quote. 1967. He said the principal U.S. cities have been chosen as the battleground simply because they afford the kind of cooperation by the innocent and the uninformed that such revolution needs, end quote. Folks, that's why we do what we do in part. Here he is saying they chose America for many reasons, of course. America is no longer here. You know how many other countries fall and fail? But he said they need the innocent and the uninformed for such a revolution. How many young people on the streets or will be on the streets soon who are there because they're frustrated? The price of a home, a car, health insurance. They feel the American dream is not attainable. Inflation, the hidden tax. They take that frustration and demoralization and they use it for destabilization. Isn't that what the former KGB officer Yuri Bezmenov warned about? Demoralize, destabilize, chaos, and then the new norm of a socialist state. How many young people do we have to try to reach, folks? who are uninformed, don't understand the worldview war, don't understand that socialism and communism is not the answer. That is not going to make things better. Go to Cuba, check out what that's like. Everybody gets the same amount, the same check, the same amount of bags of rice, whether you're a doctor or a ditch digger. And when these people, when they do come to power, they never give power to the people, ever. Look at Cuba. Look at Venezuela. Look at East Germany, behind the Berlin Wall. They keep it for themselves. And of course, many of those people that help them get into power, the young people who are useful idiots, they become the most vocal and angry because they're not getting what they were promised. And those people are generally the first ones eliminated because they have too much clout, because they were community organizers to help bring about the revolution. But what we need is to make sure we don't have too many uninformed young people that will throw in with this, something that we've been warned about again and again and again. And here we are. And it's going to come from places we didn't expect. Neo-Nazis, communist neo-Nazis mixed together for national Bolsheviks, going after a mosque. Not because they disagree with the mosque, because those guys in their manifesto talked about it being the Jews. You would think Islam, with its hatred of the Jews, they'd be united. But again, what they're trying to do is bring about a civil war, manufactured chaos. They do this. The left puts in more gun controls. The right, they hope, will scream and holler to the point of a civil war. We have to be careful to examine everything that's going on. That's why when I saw those gas cans with those lightning bolts on them from the Nazis, I thought, wait a minute, why are perceived neo-Nazis attacking a mosque? Something doesn't add up. The worldview of Islam and the worldview of the Nazis have a long history of working together, as we said, back to Hitler and the Grand Mufti of Palestine. When you know the worldviews, when you know the ideas, when you know the history, you can then look at modern events and say, something doesn't add up. No, those are not groups that would normally be against each other. Those are groups that would work together to defeat a shared enemy, the Christian and the Jews. So why do we have neo-Nazis attacking a mosque? Something's not adding up here. Isn't that the show we did yesterday? So we went to research it. We get the manifesto, this nearly 75-page manifesto of these two kids. We start studying who it is they're following. And we find out very fast that part of this national Bolshevik movement is, which is being pushed, many believe here, by Russia, the Putin worldview, is to create conflict and civil war in America. Sadly, this again goes back to worldview training. Understanding the 6 dominant worldviews that rule the world. And how many of them are now merging together or will work together, whether it's the red-green axis, the red being the Marxist, the green being the Islamist, or what we're really describing here is the black-brown. The black-brown axis of communism with the brown shirts. The communist and the brown shirts of the Nazis, the communists, the black, the brown shirts, the brown, merging together for what really is a nationalistic movement, these Bolsheviks. And then you take them and they work with the green for a green, black, brown axis. And sometimes there's going to be friendly fire. So they can now paint anyone that speaks up about Islam, like us, and warns about it, as part of that movement. As, oh, those are guys that are haters like that group. Trying to connect any truth-speaking conservative or Christians with those people. No, and that's why we condemned that in the highest manner yesterday. But they also want to do these things to bring about laws that will criminalize free speech. So if we have one attack on Muslims after another, then pretty quick, well, we have to have laws that tackle hate speech. You can't say things about Islam. That's what they do in Europe, and you get arrested for speaking truth about Islam. We would be in trouble for saying the things we say in America if we lived over there. And what they want to do is limit free speech so that then the right will react. So whether it's going after free speech, going after the Second Amendment, their goal is to cause this agitation to the point that justification is brought at the local and state level, and if they get the opportunity at the federal level, to bring legislation that begins to criminalize the conservatives and the Christians. But how did we get this to this point? You had agitators deliberately creating chaos and crime to justify the legislation to crack down on the Christian and conservative right, hoping that some of them will then pick up arms and go to a civil war. Don't be played, folks. We don't want to be played. We have to understand their tactics. We don't want to play into their hand. That's why I did my commentary last night at the end of the Worldview Report. Stop calling yourself Christian nationalists. You're playing into a slogan they want you to be defined by, as in like neo-Nazis. So what we've learned tonight is that oftentimes what we see requires a deep worldview understanding to fully understand. If you don't have the worldview understanding, you're not going to understand. You won't be able to look at the news of the day and say, wait a minute, there's red flags here. Why? Because I know these worldviews normally are lined up with each other, so we better go investigate. Isn't that what we said yesterday? That's what we did. Now we brought you the answers. But remember, a revolution like this, going back to the 60s, they said requires a lot of uninformed, easily manipulated young people. Oh, this is why it's so important that you as parents and grandparents are informing and educating your young people, learning these things, and then talking to them so that they aren't the useful idiots for a Marxist revolution in America. Let's take a quick break, come back. Garland Favorito, let's talk about voter fraud, election integrity, what just happened in Georgia. And remember, Georgia, in many ways, has become a swing state like Wisconsin and other states. It can make or break a presidential election. Didn't we see that with President Trump in 2020? What's going on in Georgia? Because it does matter when it sets the tone for federal elections. Let's talk to him about that and where he thinks things are going for the fall. Okay? We'll be right back with Garland Favorito.
For over 35 years, Brannon Howse has helped Christians understand the times. Now everything he's built lives in one place, the Worldview Tube Vault. Step inside and you'll find thousands of hours of exclusive programming on the Bible, culture, and the worldview issues shaping our world. Ebooks, audiobooks, documentaries, and decades of teaching, all in one searchable library. There's a brand new courses feature, led by our first release, the Book of Revelation, taught verse by verse by Brannon Howse. Grave Influence and more courses are on the way. Read Brannon's books, Marxianity, Grave Influence, Religious Trojan Horse, Put Your Beliefs to the Test, and his upcoming Revelation commentary, every title also available as an audiobook. Plus all his documentaries, Siege, Sabotage, and Brainwashed America, with Part 3 coming soon. Vault members can also stream the 2026 Worldview Weekend Conference, plus presentations from past Ozarks conferences. And coming soon, our new Bible and Worldview software, answering your questions from a trusted quarantine database of sound teachers and scholars. Join today at worldviewtube.com/vault. Plans start at just $7.99 a month.